At the beginning of the 11th century, a new power emerged in southern Italy, the Normans. Descendants of Vikings who had settled in Normandy and became one of Europe's most formidable cavalry forces, they had so far largely stayed out of major Mediterranean conflicts. According to the most common version, the first Norman detachments were returning from the Holy Land and near Salerno encountered Muslim pirates. They helped the Lombards repel the attack. This clash made them visible players in the region, and local princes immediately offered them service. Southern Italy lacked heavy cavalry, so each well-armed knight was worth his weight in gold. Initially, the Normans fought as mercenaries. One of the first to receive a permanent fief was Rainulf Drengot. In 1030, the Lombard Duke of Naples granted him the castle of Aversa in reward for his service. Aversa became the first Norman county in Italy. Southern Italy became a theater of war of all against all, and the Normans were a versatile instrument. Lombard princes hired them against Byzantium, Byzantine catapans against the Lombards. At times, different Norman groups even met in battle on opposite sides. With each campaign, new waves of adventurers arrived from Normandy, attracted by easy loot and the weakness of local rulers. Nevertheless, the real history of Norman power in southern Italy began with the arrival of the sons of Tancred of Hauteville, William Ironarm, Drogo, and Humphrey. At home, they had no chance of inheritance, but they possessed what other adventurers lacked: strict discipline, military organization, and the ability to command allies. This trio laid the foundation of the future Norman state. The first major successes came during the campaigns of the famous Byzantine general George Maniakes in Sicily, where William Ironarm gained fame. On the way to Syracuse, he faced the Muslim emir Abd Allah in single combat and killed him before the eyes of both armies. After this, the Normans became the main striking force of Maniakes. Nonetheless, conflicts with Byzantine officials forced them to return to Apulia and begin their own struggle for power. In 1041 to 1042, the Normans scored a series of victories over the Byzantines at Olivento, Montemaggiore, and Montelongo. These battles were a turning point. Despite smaller numbers, Norman heavy cavalry defeated the Catapans' forces and established themselves as a new political power. At the same time, the Hautevilles did not rely solely on the sword. They sought alliances and gradually won the support of local Lombard princes. After William's death, his brothers Drogo and Humphrey succeeded him. The elder Hauteville brothers, William, Drogo, and Humphrey, developed a model of Norman expansion: a disciplined and organized army, maneuverable heavy cavalry, alliances with local elites, and gradual accumulation of power. On this foundation later rose Robert Guiscard, the ruler who transformed the Normans from a group of ambitious mercenaries into the de facto masters of southern Italy. By the mid-11th century, the Normans had grown from foreigners into a power that set the rules. This alarmed everyone. Byzantium, which wanted to reclaim lost territories, the Lombard princes who resisted new overlords, and of course the Pope, who feared the Normans would become an uncontrollable and warlike stratum independent of ecclesiastical authority. In an atmosphere of tension, mutual distrust, and fear, a clash with Rome became inevitable. In 1053, an anti-Norman coalition was formed. Papal forces, Lombards, and German mercenaries sought to restore control over the south and destroy the holdings of Humphrey, Guiscard, and their allies. Pope Leo IX, convinced that it is the apostolic capital which had the right to determine the political balance in the region, personally led the campaign. He was supported by Emperor Henry III, who wanted to curb Norman expansion and maintain the Holy Roman Empire's influence. Pope Leo IX arrived in Apulia and stationed his forces along the Fortore River near the city of Civitate. The plan was simple: wait for the Byzantine army of Argyrus and combine forces. The Normans, aware of the threat, moved to intercept the Pope before the Byzantines could arrive. Yet, due to lack of provisions, the Normans could barely muster around 3,000 cavalry and 500 infantry. The Papal coalition, Lombards, Germans, and Italians, had twice the number of troops. The Normans proposed a truce to buy time and find a way out of the situation, but they received a categorical refusal. The Normans approached from the east and divided into 3 parts. The right flank of heavy cavalry was led by Richard of Aversa. In the center stood Humphrey, with infantry, mounted knights, and archers. Robert Guiscard commanded the left, with mixed cavalry and Slavic infantry. The Papal army also had 2 main lines: heavy Swabian infantry under Gerard, Duke of Lorraine, on the right, and Italian militias under Rudolph on the left. The Byzantines did not arrive in time, and Pope Leo IX did not personally enter the field. The Normans attacked first. Richard of Aversa led his cavalry against the Italian flank. The enemy line instantly collapsed. Without fighting, the Italians fled in panic. The Normans pursued them into the coalition camp, but soon had to return, as the main battle was taking place on the hill. There, the Swabians clashed with the Norman center. The Germans advanced up the hill, exchanged arrows with Norman archers, and then engaged in close combat. Most of the fighting likely occurred on foot. The Swabians were brave and skilled in hand-to-hand combat, but less effective on horseback. The battle in the center dragged on. Humphrey held back the Swabian assault, but began to weaken. Seeing the danger, Robert Guiscard led the left flank into battle and attacked the Swabians from the side. The Calabrians under his command also played a key role. Their strike stabilized the center. The turning point came with the return of Richard of Aversa. After pursuing the Italians, his cavalry struck the Swabians from the rear. A double blow, front and flank, broke the coalition's resistance. The Papal army could not hold. Pope Leo IX fell into the Normans' honorable captivity. Formally, he was not imprisoned, but effectively controlled by Robert Guiscard, who used this leverage for diplomatic advantage. The pontiff returned to Rome only 9 months later. In 1054, Pope Leo IX died. Meanwhile, relations between East and West sharply deteriorated after the Great Schism. Byzantium was no longer considered an ally in Rome. The Normans proposed a new formula to the papacy: military support and loyalty in exchange for recognition of their conquests. Under pressure from the German emperor, this offer was highly attractive to the Holy See. The climax came at the Synod at Melfi in 1059. Pope Nicholas II formally recognized Robert Guiscard's authority over Apulia, Calabria, and, most importantly, Sicily. This was not merely a title. The Pope effectively legitimized the future war against the Muslims, whom Rome regarded not only as political rivals, but as enemies of Christianity. The Normans gained the right not only to hold conquered lands, but to continue their expansion. This decision had enormous consequences. First, the Normans finally received the political recognition they had lacked since arriving in Italy. Second, it turned the fight against the Muslims into a true holy campaign. It was no longer just a local conflict over land, but a sanctioned war for territories that had been under Islamic control for over 2 centuries. Before claiming Sicily, however, they had to secure a strategic path. Calabria became the staging ground for the future invasion. Formerly under Byzantine control, the region was weakened. Seljuk pressure in the east, Pecheneg raids in the Balkans, and a few Byzantine garrisons holding only key fortresses in Italy. Robert Guiscard began a methodical and relentless campaign. The Normans captured city after city: Rossano in 1059, Gerace, Aspromonte, cutting off the Byzantines from reinforcements and blocking ports. By 1060, Robert had besieged the last Byzantine stronghold, Reggio di Calabria, directly across from Messina. The fall of Calabria meant one thing: the Normans now controlled the shore from which they could strike at Sicily. Yet amid the Norman advance, an unexpected figure suddenly emerged: Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Tumna, the Emir of Syracuse. Neither a Norman nor a Christian, he was the one who opened the way to Sicily for Roger, the younger of the Hauteville brothers, altering the course of events. By the mid-11th century, the Sicilian emirate was disintegrating. Two men sought power on the island. Ibn Tumna controlled the south and east of Sicily, while Ibn al-Hawass, the de facto ruler of Palermo, aimed to subjugate all of Sicily. Their struggle was fierce and prolonged. Ibn Tumna understood that he could not win on his own, so he took a step unthinkable for a Muslim ruler at that time. He appealed to the Normans for military assistance. For Roger Hauteville, this was an unexpected but extremely advantageous opportunity. The emir's invitation not only legitimized Norman presence on the island, but turned them from invaders into allies in a local power struggle. Ibn Tumna opened ports, warehouses, roads, and most importantly, a network of local intelligence. The Norman conquest of Sicily was not a crusade against Islam. It was a complex struggle among Muslim factions in which the Normans acted as a third force. The alliance with Muhammad ibn Tumna proved key to opening the gates for Norman advancement. In the spring of 1061, Roger, supported by his elder brother Robert Guiscard, crossed the Strait of Messina with a small vanguard under cover of fog. The Messina garrison did not expect an attack from the sea. When morning light dispersed the mist, the Normans reached the shore and struck before the Muslim army could assemble. The Messina garrison retreated to the citadel, but Roger broke into the city. Simultaneously, the Norman fleet blocked the harbor. Within hours, the strategic port that supplied Palermo from Africa fell, Roger's first victory in Sicily. The Normans secured a beachhead on the island, Messina and surrounding lands. Their main advantage, though, was exploiting divisions among the Muslims. Roger acted swiftly and cautiously, avoiding major pitched battles and gradually advancing inland. Greek Christians in the northeast supported him, seeing in the Normans a chance to break free from Palermo's rule. In 1063, this strategy bore fruit at the Battle of Cerami, where a small Norman force of 130 to 600 knights defeated a much larger Zirid army from North Africa, numbering 3,000 to 50,000. After these initial rapid successes near Messina and Cerami, a period followed that outwardly seemed slower. Yet, this phase determined the outcome of the conquest. Logistical difficulties and systematic resistance from Muslim garrisons in central Sicily forced the Normans to rely on cunning and diplomacy rather than sheer force. From 1064 to 1067, Roger Hauteville and Robert Guiscard conducted a military-political campaign to win the loyalty of locals and secure territorial control. The northeastern part of the island, from Messina to the Nebrodi Mountains, called Valdemone, was predominantly Greek Christian, Byzantine descendants who preserved language, faith, and traditions. Roger built fortifications, granted privileges, encouraged settlement of Italians and Lombards, and acted as protector of the Christian population. Muslim chroniclers noted, Greeks from all towns and villages flocked to the Franks, the Normans. It was an exhausting but effective strategy. Methodically suppress Muslim resistance through sieges and control of strategic passes. In 1064, the Normans attempted to strike near Palermo. It was not yet a siege of the capital, but a show of force, signaling that the Christians were expanding beyond the northeast. Yet their challenge was not only the Muslim army. According to Goffredo Malaterra, nature itself intervened. On the approach to Palermo, the Normans camped near an ancient temple, only to be overwhelmed by swarms of insects at night, forcing a retreat. Medieval chroniclers attributed this to mysticism, though the reason was simple. The location favored mosquitoes over prolonged military encampment. The Normans realized Palermo could not be taken quickly. They needed control of roads, towns, fortresses, allies, and a well-planned strategy, of course. At this stage, the Sicilian emirate retained power, but internal instability grew. Support from Ifriqiya was scarce, as the Zirids were engaged in African conflicts. Emir ibn al-Hawas increasingly lost control over peripheral towns. The Normans took advantage of this, establishing a network of strongholds, controlling mountain passes, and securing supply lines between towns. By the end of 1067, they were firmly entrenched in Val d'Amone, from Messina to Randazzo, from Taormina to interior mountain villages. In 1068, the Normans scored one of their most decisive victories in Sicily at the Battle of Misilmeri near Palermo. Muslim commanders assembled a significant force to defeat the Normans before they could consolidate their northeastern positions. They sought open field combat to exploit their numerical advantage in cavalry. Roger, with a much smaller force, relied on the maneuverable, disciplined Norman heavy cavalry to strike decisively at the right moment. The battle was brief. The mighty Norman knights attacked and, despite being outnumbered, broke through the ranks of unprepared Muslims, sowing panic. The enemy force disintegrated and was almost entirely destroyed. One of the most famous episodes associated with Misilmeri occurred immediately after the battle. The Muslims had brought carrier pigeons with them. Roger ordered pieces of paper soaked in the blood of the fallen enemies to be attached to these birds and released toward Palermo. In this way, the townspeople learned of the defeat of their army. While Roger fought in Sicily, his brother Robert Guiscard waged an equally important campaign on the mainland. The Normans now faced a two-front war, against Muslims on the island and Byzantines in Italy. The Byzantine Empire, despite crises and defeats elsewhere, still held Bari, the center of Byzantine Italy and the main naval base. The Byzantines understood that the fall of Bari would end their centuries-long presence on the Apennines Peninsula. In 1068, Robert Guiscard began the siege of Bari, one of the longest and most challenging in medieval southern Italy. The city had strong walls, a large garrison, and support from the imperial fleet, which occasionally broke the Norman blockade. Defenders fought fiercely, hoping for reinforcements from Constantinople. The Normans lacked sufficient ships for a full naval blockade, and assaults on the walls were costly and exhausting. But Guiscard did not retreat. He built a fleet, cut off maritime access to the city, intercepted Byzantine transport ships, and repeatedly carried out night assaults, partially destroying the fortifications. Bari held out for nearly 3 years. In April 1071, the exhausted city surrendered. With the fall of Bari, over 5 centuries of Byzantine history in Italy came to an end. Guiscard established himself as the main ruler of southern Italy. After Bari, the Normans could finally concentrate all their forces on a single front. Their naval and land units were no longer split between the island and the mainland. Robert Guiscard turned towards Sicily to strike decisively alongside his brother Roger and begin the siege of Palermo. Palermo was more than just a city, a powerful fortress, the heart of the emirate, a wealthy port with thousands of inhabitants and towering walls. The Muslim elite understood that losing Palermo meant losing all of Sicily. Consequently, not only local garrisons but also forces from Africa, remnants of the Zirid army, sailors, volunteers, and Berber mercenaries, defended the city. This was the last attempt to stop the Normans. In August 1071, the combined forces of Robert Guiscard and Roger landed near Monte Pellegrino, a few kilometers from the city walls. Guiscard led the naval blockade, cutting off the harbor with his fleet and preventing reinforcements from North Africa. Meanwhile, Roger deployed the land army, tightly encircling the city from the mainland. The siege lasted nearly 6 months. The Muslims occasionally made sorties, attempting to break the blockade or set Norman siege works on fire. They used light cavalry, archers on the walls, catapults, and fire projectiles. But gradually, Norman pressure became overwhelming. Guiscard blocked the harbor with heavy chains and wooden barriers that destroyed any ships attempting to break through. Meanwhile, Roger strengthened positions on land and deployed large siege engines capable of battering city walls from a distance. In December 1071, the Normans launched their first major assault on the walls. The Muslims repelled the attack, but the defenses were already crumbling. Hunger began to take its toll in Palermo. The city held out, though all food supplies were exhausted, and the African fleet could not break the blockade. In January 1072, after several days of continuous Norman bombardment and a demonstration of preparations for an assault, the Muslim elders sent envoys to negotiate the city's surrender. Guiscard and Roger demanded unconditional capitulation. A few days later, Norman heavy cavalry and other units broke into the city, pushing the Muslim garrisons into the inner citadels. The final assault lasted only a few hours. Palermo fell, and the Sicilian emirate ceased to exist. Robert Guiscard returned to the mainland, where new campaigns against Byzantium awaited him. Roger remained ruler of the island, holding the title Count of Sicily. After Palermo's fall, the Normans rapidly advanced westward. By 1077, they captured Trapani and a number of important mountain fortresses in Erice. This was more than a military success. Roger Hauteville established control over the entire coastline, permanently cutting Muslim sea routes to North Africa. Though in 1081, the situation changed sharply. The Muslim nobility had been broken after losing Palermo and western cities. A new leader emerged. The Emir of Syracuse, Benevert, gathered resistance forces around himself. He had a well-fortified city, support from local garrisons, and, most importantly, continuous contact with North Africa. Ifriqiya provided him with ships, weapons, and a detachment of experienced fighters. Benevert acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He attacked Norman garrisons around Catania, briefly capturing them, attempting to cut the supply routes between Norman fortifications along the eastern coast, and effectively restored a front that had already collapsed. The war became maneuver-based again. Muslims used rapid raids, local terrain knowledge, and support from coastal garrisons. The Normans relied on heavy cavalry and mobile landing forces, transferring troops by sea along the coast. The confrontation dragged on for years, a grueling struggle for every valley, mountain, and port. Benevert's counteroffensive was the most serious attempt by the Muslims to regain strategic initiative after Palermo's fall, yet it ultimately led to the prolonged siege of Syracuse in 1086. In May 1086, Roger Hauteville launched the final, decisive assault on Syracuse. On May 20th, his fleet left Messina and later joined the land army commanded by Roger's son, Jordan. By May 22nd, the Normans were 15 miles from Syracuse. Disguised as fishermen, scouts, Sicilians fluent in Greek and Arabic, assessed the real state of the defenses. At dawn on May 25th, the Norman fleet advanced. In the naval battle, crossbows gave the decisive advantage. Emir Benevert personally led the fleet, fighting on the bow of his ship, but he was mortally wounded and fell into the sea. His death broke the resistance. Roger surrounded Syracuse from land and sea, blockaded Ortigia, and laid siege to the city. Although there was a real chance to storm it, Roger restrained Jordan, and the siege lasted over 4 months. In the fall, when Benevert's widow and son escaped the encirclement, Syracuse surrendered. After Syracuse fell, only one significant center of Muslim power remained on the island, Noto in the southeast. The city held out thanks to natural fortifications and narrow approaches. But after 1086, this resistance became largely symbolic. Local emirs realized that aid from Africa would no longer come, and that the Normans guaranteed life and property to those who surrendered voluntarily. In January 1091, Noto capitulated without major bloodshed. Thus ended the conquest of Sicily, which Roger had begun almost 30 years earlier. While he concluded the campaign on the island, the Norman fleet already looked south. Malta, still under Muslim control, became the next step in their maritime strategy. In 1091, Roger landed on the island. After Sicily's fall, Malta had no hope of resistance. A short siege, and the local rulers surrendered voluntarily. The island recognized Roger's authority, agreed to pay tribute, and received guarantees of religious tolerance and local self-government. With the subjugation of Noto and Malta, the process that would later be called the Norman Reconquista of Sicily concluded. One of the most successful campaigns of the Middle Ages, in which a small group of northern warriors established a new Christian state on the ruins of the Arab Emirate.